Episode 1 of Hard Knocks with the New York Giants just dropped, and I'm going to recap everything for you guys right now. What is going on, guys? What is going on, 27 Squad? Welcome back into another video. Now, listen, there's a lot to talk about with this new edition of Hard Knocks with the New York Giants. As you guys know, this is the first time HBO is really doing this type of Hard Knocks edition where they are deep diving into the offseason as opposed to their other editions with training camp and in season. This highlights all the behind the scenes things that go on with the front office, especially the GM, and that being Joe Schoen of the New York Giants, and kind of going through how they're going to build their team for next year and seasons after that. Everything from free agency to the draft to discussing new hires at the defensive coordinator position, going through and scouting, all of that stuff. Also, guys, I dropped another short doc before this episode, a short documentary on Dexter Lawrence, kind of documenting his life and his career up to this point and kind of going over how he's changed the nose tackle position. If you guys want to check it out, click the card up above, and you guys are going to love that one, I promise you. Now, this first episode starts out with Chris Rossetti, the director of pro scouting, talking to Joe Schoen in his office about the Saquon situation.
Who would you say would go sign up running back to that dollar amount?
A team that's, anyone that has money to spend.
And this is what I'd like to see all the front office guys kind of getting together and talking, because Joe Schoen was convinced that Saquon Barkley was not going to get upwards of about $12 million a year, and Chris Rossetti was smart enough to predict that. He said he is going to be the highest paid running back in the market, and I think that he will get $12 million, because if you look at the rest of free agency, does anybody really impact the game? Is anybody really a difference maker like Saquon Barkley?
There's a lot of running backs in free agency.
Yeah, but are any potential difference makers really?
And he was spot on. He was correct. As the Philadelphia Eagles signed him to a major contract, Joe Schoen didn't want to hear it. Now, just watching this episode, I don't know if all of Hard Knocks is going to be centered around Joe Schoen. If you guys have watched Hard Knocks, they kind of jump around between different players, coaches, anybody to try to get kind of dedicate a episode to them, almost kind of follow them around. I don't know if Joe Schoen is going to be the entire Hard Knocks, but as far as episode 1, I think he was a great candidate for like the spotlight. If there was one GM to highlight in Hard Knocks, I love the fact that they highlighted Joe Schoen. He's funny, he's likable, he's younger, he's not one of these older guys that kind of outdated, doesn't know how to be on camera. Joe Schoen, you can see that he is charming, he's very attentive, he's observant. He's just fun to watch on TV. And it's very interesting to kind of get his perspective on how he wants to run the team and his mindset on things. Another person I enjoyed watching is assistant GM Brandon Brown. They brought him in from the Philadelphia Eagles. Again, very well-spoken guy, very charming as well. Again, another young guy, Joe Schoen and Brandon Brown being very young and kind of these new school of front office guys that I think the NFL needs more of. Chris Rossetti is awesome. Now, I'll be honest, I haven't really heard of the guy until Hard Knocks, but I really like this guy. Not only did he predict the Saquon thing like to the point, and even Joe Schoen didn't believe him, but
he on the open market will probably, after we went through it, will probably get the most money just based on the explosive traits he still had.
He was right about it. He also is the guy, obviously he's the pro scouter, right? He's not the college scouter, he's the pro scouter. So he's looking at all the free agents, he's kind of giving the rundown on potential candidates that the Giants should bring in. And I love how HBO did this. It was awesome. It was like watching one of those spy movies where you're kind of like trying to form a team and you're like, all right, who do we have? And the graphic that they use as well is almost like, going through some like confidential files or whatever. It was pretty cool to see. So they go down the list of running back candidates and you can see all the running backs that they have considered. Now, I've said this before, and it was kind of said by Joe Schoen I believe during the combine. I could be wrong, or when free agency started. And Joe Schoen was talking about running back candidates that they can bring in if Saquon Barkley were not to come in. And he just kind of threw out names, and he named two players that obviously he had in Buffalo and was part of drafting in Buffalo in Devin Singletary and Zach Moss. And I knew from that point that the Giants were heavily considering them, bringing them in, because they're both free agents and they're both from Buffalo. Joe Schoen, very familiar. He took part in drafting both of these guys. So it was no doubt to me that both of these guys were going to be top of their list in kind of consideration for the Giants running back spots. But they start with Zach Moss and they kind of say, oh, he's great in pass protection, a good runner, but not very explosive. Then they bring in, Devin Singletary, who the Giants eventually drafted. And you go down the list. They even talked about Tony Pollard, DeAndre Swift, and Josh Jacobs. They kind of went through the list. I'm telling you, it was very, very well produced, very, very well said. Another position that Chris Rossetti was in charge of kind of scouting and looking for candidates for was defensive interior. Now, we know that Leonard Williams, who is a guy that is used a lot of the times in 3 technique, kind of like a hybrid between a defensive tackle and defensive end, which is very effective for a 3-4 scheme. Leonard Williams is gone. A'Shawn Robinson is gone. Now the Giants are stuck with Nacho, who is a good player, but a rotational guy at best, and then other, late round picks in DJ Davidson and Jordan Riley. So Chris Rossetti did another list of candidates for the defensive interior position, and listen, this one was awesome. All right, I was like blown away with what they actually considered doing, but they didn't obviously do. The Giants didn't even get they didn't address defensive tackle at all, whether it was free agency or the draft. Now, I'm assuming that's because they just didn't have the funds to really throw out there for one of these guys, and in the draft, other prospects took precedent with that. But get this, they considered Chris Jones. They considered bringing in Chris freaking Jones to pair up with Dexter Lawrence, and man, that would have been absolutely insane. Now, I don't think it would have been the best move, although we would have loved to see it. That is just too much money to throw out there to 2 defensive tackles, which honestly, you don't need those 2 guys. It's kind of a little bit of overkill. If the Giants were in a position to absolutely win a championship this year and they have a clear hole and a clear need and a candidate worth getting like Chris Jones, then by all means, go ahead and do it. But where the team is at right now, I just don't think it was in the best interest to go ahead and get Chris Jones and Dexter Lawrence when the team is still a little bit in shambles. Another interesting nugget, we hear Chris Rossetti also bring up the name Christian Wilkins, and that is significant because he is another guy that's one of the top defensive tackles in the league. Not only that, he also played with Dexter Lawrence in college, so what better of a candidate to bring in to pair up with Dexter Lawrence than his best friend, who they said on the show is his best friend. And get this, Dexter Lawrence even texted Joe Schoen about bringing in Christian Wilkins.
Texted me about him the other day.
Who did?
Dexter asked what we thought. So
he basically tried to recruit him in, and man, that would have been another fun one to bring in. I don't know how much Christian Wilkins signed with the Raiders, but that one was another one where probably could have been done if the Giants had the funds for it. I think if the Giants were in just a little bit of a better situation financially this season, as they were kind of strapped down, they just couldn't get a lot of free agents this year. But that is one guy that I think the Giants would have definitely brought in had it not been for the cap situation. Now, the biggest thing that I can probably get out of this episode is the relationship between Joe Schoen, the Giants, and Daniel Jones. In the next scene, we see Joe Schoen in his office sitting down with Brandon Brown and the director of player personnel, Tim McDonald. Now, I think the director of player personnel, I don't know exactly what their roles are, but just by hearing player personnel, probably kind of a guy that looks over the roster and kind of looks over the personnel in the on the roster and see who we have, the depth and things like that. And Joe Schoen had a lot of interesting things to say about Daniel Jones. Now, this clip is going to go absolutely viral, obviously, because Joe Schoen is like really going hard for Daniel Jones, but we see later on in the episode that is not the case whatsoever, not yet, but he does defend Daniel Jones to a great extent. He begins talking about 3 injuries in 2 years is very concerning, it's not sustainable, things like that. He also talked about how the game in Miami, they had 3 practice squad guys, guarding for Daniel Jones. He even brings up the very popular talking point that we hear on Twitter from one side saying, if you put Patrick Mahomes back there and he's not winning. And to an extent, I think he's probably right. But I know the anti-Jones guys, I don't know what they're thinking right now, but I know that they are eating that up because that is something they hear on Twitter from the pro-Jones guys like forever. Adding on to that, he said, I don't want to give up on him. I'm not going to give up on him. He has 3 more years under this contract. And he just wants to see him get a fair shot. He does not think to this point that he's had a fair shot to show that he is the franchise quarterback. And to an extent, I understand that, but at the same time, it's just a sad situation to see. Daniel Jones has had 6 seasons with the New York Giants, and it's just a weird sort of phenomenon to see that we're still trying to figure out if he's the guy after 6 seasons, whether it is his fault or not. At some point, you have to look at the front office and not just the players or even Daniel Jones of like, what the hell are we doing here? Why is it taking 6 seasons and a new contract to see if you've got the guy or not? Like I said, whether it be Daniel Jones' fault or not, why haven't we supported him and surrounded him with the talent needed to succeed? So I can understand what Shane is saying, but at the same time, what are we doing with a 6-year quarterback trying to see if he's the guy or not? Why aren't we just cutting our losses and saying, like, let's move on to another quarterback. Let's reset the quarterback clock. We could even say, like, listen, this is not Daniel Jones' fault. This is not personal, but we need to reset the quarterback clock. Next, Dable pulls Joe Schoen into an office and says, hey, listen, I want to bring in Shane Bowen to be our next guy. Here's his numbers. I thought it was a cool interaction where his name or, the candidacy wasn't brought up in like a meeting or they're going through defensive coordinator candidates. And there's a reason for that, but I'll get to that in a second. But I thought it was cool how he just brought him in, showed his cell phone. I don't know if he pulled up stats from NFL.com or whatever, or just said, hey, listen, this is what he's done over the past couple of seasons, especially in the run defense department, and I want our run defense to look like that. Now, there's a reason why Shane Bowen was signed so late by the New York Giants. As Wink Martindale, that situation happened like all the way back in January, and the Giants were doing a bevy of defensive coordinator interviews and meetings and things like that, and the Giants were just missing on guys over and over and over again. There were guys taken off the board. There was like a Denard Wilson or something like that. I forgot his name. The Baltimore Ravens secondary coach, which a lot of people really liked, and he wound up not being a guy. He was hired somewhere. I think he took the Titans job, actually. And I personally do not think Dable or the rest of the Giants front office even consider Shane Bowen top priority. I don't. I think that honestly, the Giants were just running out of options. They had to pick up a defensive coordinator. I believe Shane Bowen was fired from Tennessee, if I'm not mistaken. So it was kind of, pick up the scraps of the guy. And Shane Bowen is not a bad candidate whatsoever. He just has a different philosophy. The Giants are really built as an aggressive blitzing team that plays a lot of man defense. Shane Bowen is kind of the opposite of that, where he focuses more on a 4-man rush. It's still a base 3-4, but heavy zone defense, which the Giants haven't really ran to a full extent in quite a while now. And I thought it was interesting. They brought in Shane Bowen. He was already hired, and he's just going through kind of the basics of his scheme. He said it is a base 3-4 defense, but he really want to focus on 4 elite pass rushers there. And I thought it was so cringe. It was so funny where he brings up Boogie Basham and Ryder Anderson as being, that guy that plays 3-tech/5 tech, kind of the Leonard Williams type guy, right? Where in a 3-4, where based on your alignment, if you're playing over or under, looks, you've got either that main priority rusher who plays either 5-tech or 3-tech, just based on if you're playing over or under. And they brought up those 2 names. Like, come on, are we serious right now? Now, if the Giants focus on a 4-man rush, I don't think any of those guys would be that good. Boogie Basham would probably be the best out of Ryder Anderson and whoever the hell you bring up. But honestly, we'll see what happens. Obviously, the guys are going to be Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns, Dexter Lawrence, and they're going to have to bring in, somebody else. Now, that's not going to be base defense at all. The base defense is probably going to be, the 3 down linemen is going to be Dexter Lawrence, Nacho, and I'm assuming Boogie Basham. And then, you're going to have, Kayvon Thibodeau, Brian Burns. That's who you're going to have in, like, your typical, 3-4. Now, they don't blitz a lot, so you're looking at that 3-4, and somebody's going to drop back, and it's probably going to be Kayvon. So I just don't want them running base 3-4 really at all, unless they're on like run stuffing downs. I don't want them in base 3-4 at all. I want to stick with the nickel. I want to stick with Dexter Lawrence. You're going to have to put in Nacho in there. Dexter Lawrence, Nacho, Kayvon, and Brian Burns. That's who I want there. And we get a little taste. We saw this on Twitter, but we get a little taste of the trade with Brian Burns. It was a cool exchange, man, with new GM Dan Moore. And Dan Moore and Joe Schoen go back a long time, as Dan Moore was drafted when Joe Schoen was in the front office of the Carolina Panthers, and Dan Moore was a player, and he worked his way to GM. So they go back a long time. Their families are very close. And Joe Schoen takes his opportunity to go to his mentor, Brennan Bean, and his good friend Dan Moore, and says, hey, like, what do you guys want to do for the 6th pick? You know, what do you guys want to do? And then all of a sudden, Dan Moore is like, what do you want to do for Brian Burns? And then that's when the trade sort of kicked off, the trade situation kicked off, where Joe Schoen, his interest was piqued, and he was like, oh, snap. You want to trade Brian Burns? And Dan Moore says, would you give up 2 1s for Brian Burns? Now, we obviously know that did not happen, as the Giants only gave up a 2nd rounder and a couple of 5ths. So I'm very interested to see later on, this is going to be after the combine and during free agency, where we get that trade with Brian Burns. I'm very interested to see how that negotiation goes, because obviously we all know Brian Burns needs to be signed. There's no way that you're going to, give up 2 1s for Brian Burns, who needs to be signed to play. And then towards the end, we see John Mara and Joe Schoen talking, and this is what I don't like. I'm not in a front office, but I really don't like how an owner is kind of giving his thoughts on what a GM should do and kind of just let the GM do his thing. You see John Mara kind of making a case on possibly keeping Saquon and doing what he can to keep him. And Joe Schoen honestly seems checked out. Joe Schoen seems like he just does not want to bring Saquon back at all. He was not interested at all. He's been talking, every time he's brought up, he's talked about replacing him. Every time he's brought up in this episode, even outside and during the combine interviews and stuff like that, every time he's brought up, he's talked about replacing him. So it's very clear that Joe Schoen doesn't really have clear intentions of bringing back Saquon Barkley.
There's a lot of running backs in free agency.
But you see John Mara say, quote, in a perfect world, I would bring back Saquon Barkley, and Joe Schoen just seemed like he don't want to hear it. And now we're at the end of the episode where there's some information that could have some major implications to where the Giants move in the future, as they are talking about Saquon Barkley again, but it kind of moves to Daniel Jones. They kind of replay what happened at the beginning of the episode where Chris Rossetti says, listen, he's going to get somewhere around $12 million. Do we really want to let someone like that go? And again, Joe Schoen doesn't want to hear it, and he says, listen, we signed Daniel Jones to a major contract. We signed him for $40 million. He emphasizes that, and he says this.
Paying the guy $40 million. It's not to hand the ball off to a $12 million back.
And I love that he said that, where he is wanting to put responsibility on the quarterback and not having to, pay unnecessary positions to do that, because they are a little bit cap strapped. And at the end of the episode, the final statement, Joe Schoen says this.
Plan all along was give him a couple years. Is he our guy for the next 10 years, or do we need to pivot and find somebody else?
So I know the beginning of the episode, and I know this all of Hard Knocks is going to be tailored, it's going to be edited to make the Giants look a lot better and kind of clear up some, controversy, but I truly don't think Joe Schoen, I think he defends him, I think he likes Daniel Jones. I don't think Joe Schoen is really willing to lose his job over Daniel Jones. I know he re-signed him, I know it looks terrible, but I don't think Joe Schoen is set in stone. That is my guy. Daniel Jones is my guy. He said it. He said, we don't even know if, he basically said, we don't even know if he's the guy yet. The plan was to surround people, give him a couple years, surround him with talent, and see if he's the guy. If not, we've got to find somebody else. And catch what Tim McDonald says over here.
We're losing
a
large part of our offense, our explosiveness, our touchdowns. Quarterback, if it's Daniel, depends on the run game.
Now, I don't know if many of you caught that, but he says, if Daniel Jones is the guy. Now that really tells me that there is possibly talks about replacing Daniel Jones that we are not seeing in Hard Knocks, because up to this point, we have never even talked about, even had an idea of possibly getting another quarterback in here. So how is Tim Donald, the director of player personnel, saying, what is our identity next year? Is it going to be with the quarterback if it's Daniel Jones? Come on. So that is the recap, guys. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. What do you guys think? I'm excited for episode 2. And I think episode 2, we're going to be focusing a lot more on the combine. And I think that's the next order of operations. There is the combine. And maybe they'll focus on another person, player, whoever. So that being said, leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Leave a like if you guys enjoyed. Subscribe if you guys are new. And I'll see you guys in the next video.